hotels. 8 enormous new hotels were inaugurated. Another 5 will be opened by December. All this while Cuba's so-called economic engine continues to stall, as evidenced by these old convertibles standing idle in old Havana for lack of foreign tourists. Millions of Cubans depend on tourism.
It's a chain. If I work, I spend money, and others make money. The prohibition of cruise ships imposed by Donald Trump has impacted us a lot.
The streets are empty, there are no tourists almost anywhere. So the big question is, why are they building so many new hotels? New hotels are being built with government money on property not being claimed in U.S. courts. Should Cuba's one-party state system eventually change, they could then be bought and sold. Industry officials insist they're simply preparing for a tourism boom, a feat that will take more than just new hotels.
Power defines our world.
We live here. We make the rules, not them.
People in Power investigates, exposes, and questions the use and abuse of power around the globe on Al Jazeera.
Israel attacks homes in Rafah in southern Gaza, killing at least 16 people, including children. I'm Nick Barker. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, long-awaited humanitarian aid arrives in Gaza after Israel and Hamas reach a new deal brokered by Qatar. The US strikes several parts of Yemen after the Houthis target another ship in the Red Sea. And charged with treason, but a court allows Sierra Leone's former president to leave the country. Thanks for joining us. And we begin in Gaza, where at least 16 people have been killed in overnight shelling in the city of Rafah. Children are among those killed. Several have been wounded. Israeli strikes hit a house in the eastern part of the city. Fighting is also taking place between Palestinian groups and Israeli troops near Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. That's for a second night. Well, desperately needed medicine and other humanitarian aid has finally entered Gaza. It was sent from Qatar hours after a deal was reached between Israel and Hamas to allow the supplies to be distributed. Imran Ullah Khan has more.
Life-saving aid for Gaza, following a Qatari and French brokered deal between Israel and Hamas. The cargo includes humanitarian essentials for Palestinians, as well as medicine for Israeli captives in the besieged Strip. The United Nations is overseeing the process. Aid has been sporadically trickling in to the 2 million Palestinians besieged by Israel, often through diplomatic channels, nearly never enough.
Doctors can't find anything to treat their patients. Now they just use salt. And even salt is $13 per kilogram now. Can you imagine putting salt on people's injuries to disinfect them? We've reached a very critical point. People are dying, and we can't even find painkillers.
The UN estimates 93% of the population in Gaza is facing a severe level of hunger, and says pockets of the Strip are already experiencing famine-like conditions.
Our life has become a bunch of struggles between the queue for bread, and that for gasoline, and that for food for our children. Aside from that, people do not have income anymore that enables them to get their needs. There is no source of income. People who had income before the war, or had a business or a project, have become unemployed now.
Disease is spreading rapidly and leaving many in a state of desperation.
People have become displaced. People are ripped apart. We didn't think the situation would become like this.
While the new aid supplies will provide some relief, the UN warns if the war doesn't stop, more Palestinians will die. Not from bombs, but from famine and disease. Imran Allah Khan, Al Jazeera.
Well, the healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing. Another casualty of Israel's war on Hamas. A delegation from the World Health Organization has just returned from there and is once again warning of an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe across the Strip. Gabriel Elizondo's report contains scenes of injured people from the very start.
The healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing. Another casualty of Israel's war on Hamas. That is the assessment from Sean Casey.
This church has been turned into an inpatient ward.
The World Health Organization's emergency medical team coordinator, who just returned to UN headquarters after spending 5 weeks in Gaza.
Every time I went to the hospitals, I saw evidence again and again of the simultaneous humanitarian catastrophe that's unfolding. We see it every day in Gaza, getting worse and worse. And the collapse of the health system day by day.
Casey estimates that only 15 hospitals in Gaza are functioning, but only partially. He saw how bad the situation is firsthand. These are a couple of his reports from last month.
I'm back in Al-Shifa, the largest hospital in Gaza, for the third time this week, where it's still a case of absolute misery. We're in Al-Aqsa hospital, where I just left the resuscitation room where a 9-year-old boy named Ahmed was being treated basically with sedation to ease his suffering as he dies.
When asked what was needed the most to help the Gaza health system cope, Casey was clear: a ceasefire. That, he said, would be the most effective and immediate way to end the suffering. Gabriel Elizondo, Al Jazeera at the United Nations.
And at least 11 Palestinians have been killed in 2 separate Israeli airstrikes in the occupied West Bank on Wednesday. Israeli troops have stormed a refugee camp in Ramallah and are continuing a raid in the city of Tulkarem. Meanwhile, they've withdrawn from the town of Bani Naim, where there was fighting with Palestinian youths. Let's cross to Hamda Salhout, who's in occupied East Jerusalem. Hamda, bring us up to speed on the scale and, of course, the impact of these latest raids.
Well, this raid in Tulkarem now entering its 23rd hour this morning. The Israeli military sending in heavy reinforcements throughout the day, the night, and now the early morning to arrest several Palestinians. Remember that in the last 23 hours, 6 Palestinians alone have been killed in Tulkarem. Residents are still reporting sounds of explosions and other gunfights. But let's shift gears a little bit to a village just outside of Bethlehem, the village of Taqwa, which we are now understanding that 46 members of the same family have been arrested. It's a developing situation. We're not sure what the circumstances are just yet, but the Israeli military has subsequently raided Qalqilya in the occupied West Bank, and earlier they have raided the village of Bani Naim just outside of Hebron. This is just a continuation of the Israeli army's intensified raids since October the 7th. The army says that they are cracking down on armed Palestinian resistance, but Palestinians will tell you this is just a daily occurrence of their life under Israeli military occupation. Since October the 7th, you're looking at least 366 Palestinians who've been killed. More than 95 of them are children, at least 6,000 other arrests and 4,000 other injuries. While we've been covering these raids repeatedly, medical workers have been prevented from reaching the injured, and that situation has been the case in the last 23 hours in the city of Tulkarem.
Hamda, many thanks for that. Hamda Salhout, live in occupied East Jerusalem. Well, the war in Gaza is impacting the wider region as well. The US has launched another strike against Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. This comes only hours after Houthi rebels claimed responsibility for a new attack on a US vessel in the Gulf of Aden. The UK Maritime Trade Operation says it happened about 100 kilometres southeast of the city of Aden. The agency says a drone struck the vessel, causing a fire that the crew later extinguished.
The naval forces of the Yemeni armed forces targeted the American Jinko Picardy ship in the Gulf of Aden, using a number of naval missiles and scoring a direct and precise hit, thanks to Allah. The Yemeni armed forces will not hesitate to target all threat sources in the Arabian Sea and the Red Sea, in line with our legitimate right to defend our dear Yemen and in support of the oppressed Palestinian people.
All right, let's bring in Mike Hanna, who's standing by in Washington, D.C. And Mike, it was only a few days ago that the U.S. was saying that it doesn't want a war with Yemen. What more is being said about these latest strikes?
Well, U.S. Central Command has confirmed that these strikes took place. It's the fourth set of strikes since the initial attacks were carried out by U.S. and its allied forces on Friday last week. The Central Command says that a number of targets were selected. All of them, it says, were missiles that were prepared to be launched. They were on actual missile rails, and they were shot down or destroyed in what the Central Command says was a preemptive action. Earlier, the attack on a U.S.-owned freighter. Once again, another attack by the Houthis. This is now more than 40 attacks that the Houthis have carried out against shipping since November. The Houthi movement insistent that this is in alliance with the fight against the Palestinian forces in Gaza in response to the Israeli action there. However, the U.S. continues to contend that there is no correlation. It doesn't see it as a spreading of the conflict in Gaza. Rather, it sees it as an attack on the shipping lanes in the Red Sea. But the U.S. still contending that it has degraded the Houthi movement quite substantially. You had a spokesman from the Pentagon saying in the course of the day that they had been degraded to an extent, despite the fact that these attacks on shipping continue as it did in the course of the day. But the U.S. still maintains that position that it does not want a wider war breaking out, that it wants to control the situation. It does not want to see a spread of conflict throughout the region. But you still have these attacks going on, and now for the fourth time, a U.S. attack against Houthi targets in Yemen.
All right, Mike, many thanks for that. Mike Hanna in Washington, D.C. And in addition to what Mike's just told us, these lines from the Houthi-controlled Sabah news agency that says that the U.S. and British aircraft have targeted the governorates of Hodeidah, Taiz, Damar, al-Balah and Sada in Yemen. Of course, this will be a repeat of a few days ago. We wait for confirmation, though, from the British Ministry of Defence. And of course, we'll bring you the latest on that when we have it. Moving on now, and in response to those attacks on vessels in the Red Sea, the United States has relisted the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist group. The Biden administration had removed the designation back in 2021 in favor of allowing humanitarian aid into the
following U.S. airstrikes on Houthi-controlled missile Sea, the United States again targeted the Houthis. On Wednesday, the Biden administration announced it was designating the Houthis as a specially designated global terrorist organization.
If the Houthis cease the attacks, we can certainly reconsider this designation. If they don't, as the president said, we will not hesitate to take further actions.
The White House says the designation is designed to protect freedom of navigation. About 12 chains. Declaring the Houthis a terrorist group bans members from entering the U.S., freezes funds held in U.S. banks, and triggers sanctions against any entity providing the Houthis with support.